following story will forever remain a testament to the unseen dangers lurking just below our feet. How completing a seemingly normal task can devolve to utter chaos within just a matter of seconds. This is the brutal story behind the Key Largo manhole incident. So back in January of 2017, a utility crew out of Key Largo had been tasked with inspecting a slight dip in a newly paved roadway. And the reason for this slight depression was believed to be associated with the storm drain, as it had occurred directly next to a manhole. Ultimately, they believed that there was some type of damage to the box below, in turn allowing the soil in the immediate area to wash away into that system every time it rained. So after their morning meeting, they hop up in their trucks and head on over to this quiet little neighborhood you're looking at right here. They hop on out and head on over to the manhole, but as soon as they pop that lid, they are hit with one of the most ungodliest smells they have ever come across. And these guys deal with sewage on a regular basis, so if it's making a few of them dry heave and puke, you know it's gotta be bad. Now their supervisor, a man by the name of Kirby Brown, knows that essentially somebody from his crew has to climb down into that box in order to perform a visual inspection. Therefore, he instructs his crew to do the following. First, they use a nearby fire hydrant to flush out any stagnant water that may be sitting in the system. Next, they open up the manholes either side of the one in question. Then, they force fresh air down into the shaft in order to remove any toxic gases. However, even after all this was done, Kirby, who is now standing just outside of this hole, tells his guys, look, something just ain't right here, guys. This smell ain't going anywhere. I don't feel comfortable sending one of you down here yet, okay? So let me go to my truck. I'm going to make a couple of calls. Nobody, and I mean nobody, goes down there without my permission. But that is not at all what would happen. You see, as soon as he turned around and began walking to his truck, one of his men, a guy by the name of Elway Gray, said, you know what? I'm not waiting around on all this crap. I'm going to go ahead and get the job done. We got other things to do. We're wasting time. And so it is. He began his descent 15 feet down to the very bottom of that structure. Now Kirby notices this, so he rushes back over to that opening, but before he can even yell down at Elway to get his ass out, to his horror, the color in Elway's eyes are completely gone. They have become bloodshot. He is giving it everything he has to try and get out, but he is coughing, he's gagging, he's throwing up on himself. Before he can make it, he lost consciousness, let go of the ladder, and fell right down onto the concrete below, slamming his head in the process. Now seeing his co-worker and lifelong friend in such a dire situation, a second worker, 49-year-old Lewis O'Keefe, without a moment of hesitation, descended into the manhole. He too would collapse. So now Kirby, who had moments earlier warned his men about entering that space, throws all logic out the window. He races down that ladder in an effort to at least lift their heads up above these deadly gases and hopefully get them some fresh air, but it was of no use. He too began to feel its toxic effects. He had no choice but to let them go and try and save himself. But before he could get back topside, he too passes out. Now luckily, one of the workers up top was able to grab a hold of his shirt, and with the help of a few other men, they were able to lift him out of the hole. Well, just when you think this situation cannot possibly get any worse, 2 additional workers would attempt to enter that hole, one of which immediately resurfaced after just a few feet. That same employee then spent the next few minutes stumbling around in circles trying to figure out where he was and just what the hell he was even doing, almost as if he had gone from sober to completely intoxicated within just a matter of seconds. And unfortunately, Ryan Wilson, the final employee to enter that confined space, would never return. Now they didn't know it yet, but a few locals had actually come outside when the initial commotion began. 911 had already been contacted, therefore Key Largo Fire Department was en route and already queued in as to what was going on. Within just a few minutes, they show up and are making an attempt to rescue those men. Now a firefighter who had previously had on a closed air breathing system, knowing they were probably dealing with a lethal gas situation, ended up having to remove it in order to gain access into that manhole. But as he approaches the bottom, he too goes down. Now luckily, this firefighter was attached to a vertical retrieval system. In turn, they were able to crank down on that handle and pull him to safety. It was at this point they were 100% sure they were dealing with lethal gases. So they begin the process of forcing even more ventilation down into that system, trying to replace it with fresh air. Just a short while later, they were able to recover 2 of those men, O'Keefe and Wilson. However, sadly, they were both pronounced deceased on scene. As for Elway, they would have to wait even longer. This is due to the fact that even though they were forcing a lot of air down into that system, it just simply wasn't enough. The levels and toxicity were too sporadic. One second, you were dealing with viable oxygen, the next, you only had 5%. Further investigation by the Miami-Dade hazmat team would not only show extremely low levels of oxygen, it would also show extremely high levels of carbon monoxide and hydrogen sulfide. Now, these three factors on their own have the ability to end your life. A combination of the three is sending somebody to their most certain death. It's like going from being completely sober to being hammered beyond belief within a split second. Next, you end up passing out as your brain begins to starve of oxygen and your heart pumps out those last few final beats. You cease to exist. Now, here's a fact that makes this incident just that much more unfathomable. Most people, when hearing about it, assume it had something to do with the sewer system, but this wasn't at all the case. You see, when that box had originally been placed there many years ago, they had placed it on top of a bunch of mangroves. They didn't rip them out, they didn't try and replace any of that vegetation with viable soil. And it was for this reason all those mangroves started to decompose, which created those gases, in turn taking the lives of those men. And for months and months prior to this incident, locals in that neighborhood have been calling the city to report a backed up sewer line. They just didn't know where it was. But every time they came by, everything checked out. Turns out, it was that rotten vegetation the whole time. Dee and Higgins, the company at fault, received roughly $120,000 in fines in accordance with 3 open lawsuits for the families of the men who passed away. So what could have been done to prevent this tragedy? Well, for starters, as cruel as this might sound, Elway kind of defied a direct order. He was told not to enter that hole by his supervisor and competent person on that job site. And he did this even after being warned about the dangers that lie below. However, if he had been tied off to a vertical retrieval system, somebody up top could have easily pulled him out. In addition to this, although they did force ventilation, they never acquired any atmospheric readings. If they had lowered one of these into that hole, it would have notified them not only of the presence of lethal gases, but the fact that there was little to no oxygen. We as humans need roughly 19 to 21% to be able to survive. Well, this hole was sitting at less than 2% oxygen when the fire department initially showed up. And lastly, they did not have a rescue plan in place, nor did they have any of the proper tools to perform a rescue, even if they had a plan. And sadly, this is one of those situations where the poor decision of one individual led to the devastation of several other families in the process. That in mind, that is going to do it for this video. If this kind of content interests you and you feel like you've learned something new, be sure to leave a like, maybe subscribe to the channel as we have several other videos coming along. As always, stay safe, and we will see you on the next one.